Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Jessica Devereaux in Baltimore. 4 former Air Force drone war personnel went public with an open letter to President Obama. They are asking him to reconsider a program that killed, quote, innocent civilians and which only fueled the feelings of hatred that ignited terrorism and groups like ISIS. Now joining us to tell his story is one of those drone war personnel, Senior Airman Cian Westmoreland. He was in the United States Air Force from 2006 to 2010, and his unit assisted in 2,400 close air support missions and 200 plus enemy kills. However, the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan says that this number included around 359 civilian deaths. Thank you so much for joining us, Cian.
Thank you for having me.
So, Cian, you enlist back in 2006 and eventually you make your way to Afghanistan. Can you just quickly explain what exactly were you doing in Afghanistan and how did it relate to drone warfare?
Well, we were setting up a relay station for signals. Of course, the drones themselves don't fly autonomously yet, so there needs to be a constant feed happening there. We took a lot of the imagery and the video feeds, and we brought them all through our site, and we sent them to the Combined Air Operations Center in Al Udeid and then to Ramstein.
Okay, so you weren't actually a drone pilot, but you were a part of this whole chain. So now, so you're there, you're working in Afghanistan, but obviously you have a change of heart, or at least you start questioning what you're doing. What exactly triggered that for you?
Well, I think there was a point in my life where I was religious, and I definitely felt strongly about the whole "thou shalt not kill" and you know uh, treat love your enemies, treat others as you would treat yourself, and all those things were kind of in conflict for me when I uh, was in the military. I didn't really know what conscious objector status was or how to go about getting it. But I thought, I can't really let my team down. So I went to Afghanistan, and we built this system that enabled warfare at a distance. And I think the moment that I realized that I was doing something pretty harmful, or what I was doing was I actually had a mortar land relatively close to me, and I think that was quite jarring for me, and I was trying to find out what must be going on at the other end. The I used to watch these kids outside the fence every day, and they beg for water, and I'm just thinking, like, why do we need this sophisticated of equipment just to control this area or whatever. But the day that my boss told us to come around to the equipment, and then he handed us a headset, and he said, listen, we listened, and it was an A-10 speaking to a battle manager. And he said, we're killing bad guys now, boys. And I think just the combination of those two things have really messed with me. And I traveled after the Air Force. I went through Georgia. I saw where the Russians had bombed Gori. I went through Osh and Kyrgyzstan, and I saw where about 2,000 Uzbeks, according to sources on the ground, were massacred. And there was rumors about the opium trade that was running through that area of Kyrgyzstan. So I guess if you put that together with the opium production in Afghanistan, and you kind of see where this is going, you see that there's effects beyond the borders of Afghanistan. this war is affecting, everybody's life in that region. And I just, it was just a gradual, like, coming to the realization that I'm partially responsible for all this.
I hear you. And you found others that felt the same way. As I mentioned, four of you actually came out and wrote this open letter. So how did you end up finding these other drone war personnel?
Well, I found Brandon online. I was struggling with some things. I had just spoken out. I did a university lecture about what I was doing at my university, and I just kind of went to a bad state of depression, and tried to find someone who might have an understanding of what I was going through. And I reached out to Brandon, and then we had a conference around April 2013 where we showed the drone film for one of the first times in Europe. And yeah, I was up on the panel with him, and from then on, just kind of been networking different places all over. There's a lot of veterans who regret what they do. Not all of them are drone veterans or technicians or what have you, but there's quite a sizable community.
Yeah, but Sean, I mean, there's a lot of support for drone warfare here in America. I'm going to pull up this recent Pew Research poll. About 58% of Americans approve of missile strikes from drones to target extremists in such countries as Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia. So there's a lot of public support, at least the majority, we can say, support this program because they feel that it protects pilots. And, what would you say to those people that say, innocent civilians are going to be killed in war? That's just the nasty part of war. What's your response to that?
I would say that that argument they put forward that innocent civilians die in war. That's just what happens in war. It's really prevalent, but it's also it's kind of just a cop out. You're refusing to acknowledge the horror of war, um, and you're dismissing it and saying that this is what happens anyways. I mean, in any case, that should be the one of the prime, uh, motivations for leadership is to mitigate civilian casualties. Um, you definitely didn't see that in the beginning of the war, and now drones in themselves are being used as a foreign policy tool, just taking out um, alleged terrorists or conspirators, um, just in a precise way. But there's always going to be civilian casualties because they're wise enough to realize that uh, they need to meet in places with high amounts of civilians.
Yeah, so it's not as precise as we like to think it is.
Well, it's precise in the sense that it hits the target, and you have a long loiter time, and you know who you're hitting, but the decisions that are being made, uh, to target a place with, one uh, high-profile target, and about 30, say 30 associated people and their families, or something. I mean, it's not necessarily the weapon itself that's inaccurate. It's the way it's being used and the fact that there's no international laws that are actually governing, you know, how this thing should be used. I mean, so this is obviously not an American thing anymore. It's there's about 55 countries in the world that are producing drone technology, and they're all going to have their own agendas, and they're all going to look at how the U.S. use these drones to go into countries that we haven't formally declared war on. And they'll use the same justifications. We're setting the precedent internationally for how this technology is used, and I don't think it has been used responsibly. And I think it's been, way too experimental with a problem that is, it's, they're throwing sparks at a powder keg. I mean, it's not.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's pause the conversation here, Sean, because I want to get more into the policy and talk specifically about what you wrote to that to President Obama in that letter. So, Sean, thank you so much for joining us in part one of our talk with you about drone warfare. Thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.